My name is Duane Herrmann. I live near Topeka, near the farm where I grew up, and my family's been there for a while. I don't want to say that I'm proud to say, but I'm happy to say that my family's been in this area since the 60s. And when people hear that, then I say the 1860s, because we've been there this long, and I'm proud of that part. Grew up on a farm. My family went to church in town. My grandma came down to take me to church when I was probably 2 or 3, and she started teaching Sunday school because she taught Sunday school all the time that I ever knew her. So I'm figuring out that time backwards. Then when I went through confirmation class, it was just a normal expected thing. We didn't talk about religion because it was like the air you breathed. You didn't talk about the air, you just breathed it. And so then after confirmation class, I was officially a member of the church. And but I didn't want to be in the adult grown-up class because all those grown-ups were old people and I was not an old people. So I started teaching Sunday school, and part of the time my classroom was across the hall from my grandmother's, and I thought that was cute because there was Mr. and Mrs. Herrmann and 2 generations difference. And I was an usher and president of the youth group. And the last 2 years of high school, I wrote the Christmas program for the Sunday school kids to perform. While I was an usher, one of the things we didn't have much to do during the sermon part of the service. And so one of the things I did was read the church constitution, which I had never paid much attention to before. I'd said a lot of the words because they were just the words that you said in church. And in the constitution, it formally said those words. Specifically the resurrection of the dead, that bodies would float up to heaven. And then it was signed by people that I knew. And that's what struck me. The words in the book were just words in a book, but these words were signed and verified by people I knew. And I thought, you really believe that? Because it didn't make sense to me. I knew that physical bodies don't float in the air. And yet, why are these people who are respected members of the community saying that they really thought that that happened? So that was when I disengaged myself emotionally from the church. Now, my parents had founded the church, my grandparents, so it was a big part of the family. But I couldn't tell anybody because we didn't talk about religion. So then I left high school and I moved to town and began to go to other churches near where I lived. And I was very surprised that they were so much the same. They said some of the same liturgy, the same words, the same things. And I think, why is there all this difference? Why do they think they're separate when they're using the same words and things? And that first summer, I had a composition class, and it was my first college class. And the teacher was intrigued by things that I put in my papers. And so he would make comments about them. And we had sort of a running conversation. And one day I came to class and he asked if I would like an invitation, and I didn't want to be rude, so I said yes. And at the end of class, he gave it to me. And that's the first time I saw the word fireside, and it said the word Baha'i, and I didn't know what that was. So I went to the library, which was down the hall, and looked it up in a dictionary, and I didn't like that definition. I knew that there was a better definition for what Baha'i meant. So I went to the fireside. I needed a ride home because it was in town and I lived out on the farm still. And the teacher said he would give me a ride. So I stayed after school and I walked to the home where the fireside was. And as I approached this house, it was just a very humble house, I could sense coming out of the windows, and the door was open, some golden light. And that's the only way I can describe it, because it wasn't a physical thing. It was something different than that, but I recognized it was good, and I knew I wanted it to be in my life. I didn't care what it was. I wanted it in my life. I went to the fireside and I listened, and it was interesting, but I don't remember much about it. Most of my time was focused on the house of worship. Photograph of it was on the wall across the room from me, figuring out what the angles of the 9 sides, because that intrigued me a lot. Then I went home and I didn't go to any more firesides because that was more complicated. But then when I moved to town, I began to go to some, but they only had them every other week. And I would get lost because I didn't have a calendar to keep track of things. And so I stopped going. But in that time, I did some of my own research. I had at least 3 different translations of the Bible. And the idea that the Baha'is presented that heaven and hell were spiritual conditions, not places, was new and intriguing to me. And so I carefully read everything in the New Testament about heaven and hell, and I concluded by the different versions, by the meanings of the words, that Jesus was not talking about a physical place. He said it is like this. He said it is not this, talking about the burning and fire and stuff. And one of the Bibles I had was a study Bible, a student Bible, with the variety of meanings, so that because languages aren't equal correspondences to each other. And so this had more of those shades of meaning that were in the original, and that helped a lot. And so that was a big, major step on my part. Then they had a week of events. The Baha'is had a week of events and sent me an invitation, and I went. And one of the things they did was showed them a new movie that time called A New Wind, as about Baha'is who went pioneering to different parts of the planet. And before that, I'd been invited to dinner, and as one of the speakers was in town, and it was just that dinner was an amazing experience in my life, because they didn't all know each other before that evening, but they were instantly comfortable and friendly and very kind and loving with each other. And they welcomed me into it like I'd been there forever. And it was just an amazing experience. Then I went to the movie, and they had little response cards afterwards. And so I filled it out. And my only response was, I didn't want the movie to end. I was willing for that movie to go on and on, because I was raised in a way that I don't have very many boundaries. And so I was part of the movie. It wasn't something I watched. It was something I experienced. And I wanted to keep that experience. So then I got home that night, and I couldn't go to sleep. And I began thinking, okay, I believe this and this and this and this, and the Baha'is believe this and this, and oh my goodness, they're all the same. So I guess I must be a Baha'i. No, but they had never told me I could be a Baha'i. They never told me it was possible for me to be a Baha'i. But I recognized that I believed the same things, and whether they liked it or not, I was a Baha'i. And so I said, okay, and then I still couldn't go to sleep. So I got up, and I had no phone in that little room I was renting. So I went walking to find a payphone, found one. The first one was broken. And I called up the Baha'i. I had a phone number, and I didn't even know what to say, because nobody had ever talked about joining. And I said, and I mumbled something, and then I said the word Baha'i. And he got the idea, and he said something that I'd never heard before. And I said, well, I guess so. And so then we talked about the details of signing the card, which I would do the next day with the teacher in the class. And that was the 13th of November, 1969. So, then getting news out to the family. I had an uncle very concerned, because I don't know why he was concerned. He was concerned. He loved me. He was concerned. And he said, don't sign anything. And I said, okay. And I thanked God at that moment, because that was the week after I'd signed the card. So I could truthfully say I would not sign anything. I knew enough not to tell him. I already did, but I never thought of inviting anybody to go to a fireside with me to see what it was. It just never occurred to me until a couple of weeks ago. So then afterwards, I began to remember that I had seen pictures of the house of worship growing up. that my mother and grandmother had gone on a farm wives tour to Chicago, and she'd taken pictures of the house of worship and other places, and we'd seen it, but it was very brief, about a minute and a half, I think later, I timed it, and she didn't know what it was, and it was a cloudy day. So that was there. And maybe that was why I was intrigued by looking at the picture of the building, because something in my mind said, well, I know what this is, but I don't know what this is. And even though the family, we didn't talk about religion, when I was up at grandma's, because I would go to her house, she lived across the pasture from where I grew up, and I would go to her house very often, started when I was 2. And late at night, after all the work was done, she and I would sit on the porch and talk, and she told me her concerns about the end times and that she was sure Jesus was coming, and she wanted to make sure that I knew. And so I was very expectant, and yet she never connected that to the faith, even though when my aunts emptied her house, they gave me a pamphlet called Prophecy Fulfilled and said, "Is this yours?" And I said yes, because I recognized it, but it was printed way before I ever declared. And so I've only concluded that she picked it up when she was at the house of worship. But she never mentioned it to me, and it was probably buried somewhere, because that was 10 years or so before I declared. So the family was upset. But then as I got older, I graduated from university, I became a teacher, I got married, I had babies, I had a family, I became normal again. And so things were more calm and fine. And my uncle, that was very upset, stayed home one Sunday morning and watched a movie on CBS about the faith, and that calmed him down a whole lot. And then on the 9th anniversary of my father's death, I invited my brothers for a little memorial service for Daddy. And the one brother left, and the middle brother, the one that's younger than me, but not the youngest, stayed afterwards and asked me 3 questions about my being Baha'i. He'd never asked me before, and I answered those 3 questions. He went home. He never talked about it to me. Then a year later, I had another memorial service, and after the littlest brother went home, this brother said, just out of the blue, nothing conversation, he just said, "I want to be a Baha'i." And I was absolutely shocked and stunned, and grabbed him and ran over to the secretary's house so that he could sign his card right then. And then when the family learned, everything went bad again, because I obviously was leading him to hell with me or something. So since then, the family situation has been strained. We were separated from our cousins, and my daughter, just a year or so ago, was asking me about why she felt uncomfortable when we were at family reunions, even though I still went. And so I said a little bit about this, and she blurted out, "So you're the black sheep?" And I said, "I guess so." So that explained that to her. But I don't regret the decision. It has given me life and a reason to live. And I have gone to Israel several times. My son served in Haifa for a little while, so I was able to go there. And he teased me about I needed to leave. And even after I got back here, I've teased him back. I haven't left. I'm living under a rock in the gardens, and I'm not telling you which one, because I'm not leaving that place. And Abdul Baha did say some people never leave. So that's okay with me. So that's my story in a nutshell, I guess.